And as we studied the ancient books, we noticed the close connection and parallel to the Book of Mormon. And so such things merely strengthen, in some cases, and in other cases provoke even someone to want to study the Book of Mormon out of curiosity. But the evidences do mount, and in the church, by the general authorities, we don't identify cities or countries or rivers, but we do consider cultural parallels to be important. And there's so many cultural parallels with the Book of Mormon and these ancient peoples and these ancient texts that there's something there that really can't be denied.
Probably the most famous of ancient American texts is the Popol Vuh, kept hidden by the Quiche Mayans for almost 2 centuries to avoid its destruction. It was rediscovered in 1701 by a Dominican monk named Francisco Jimenez in a small city in the Guatemalan highlands named Chichicastenango. An expert on the Popol Vuh and author of a new and widely respected translation is LDS scholar Alan J. Christensen.
The Popol Vuh as we have it today, as transcribed in the 16th century, is a reflection of Maya theology that has existed for likely thousands of years, dating back well before the time of Christ. The parallels that we see between the Popol Vuh and, say, the Old Testament has similar concepts of how the creation was carried out by God, or by the Council of the Gods in the case of the Popol Vuh and the Book of Abraham, how the creation was carried out, the sequence of events. They have similar recollections of a universal flood that destroyed former creations that did not remember God and did not act in a manner which was conducive to progression. This is not to say that one is a copy of the other. Obviously, prior to the arrival of the Spaniards, they did not have the Old Testament in the form that we have today. But what they do have is traditions that was handed down by their ancestors for thousands of years that are reflective of a concept that likely dates back to the very beginning of time. Another interesting aspect of the Popol Vuh is that it is not written in an everyday, mundane sort of way. It's written in exquisite, beautiful poetry. And one of the poetic forms that's used fairly extensively in the Popol Vuh is Chiasmus. Chiasmus has achieved a certain amount of notoriety in the LDS community because certain scholars, such as Jack Welch, have noticed that in the Book of Mormon, a number of scriptural passages are arranged in Chiasmus. And this indicates that the Book of Mormon is truly an authentic ancient work. In the time of Joseph Smith, there was not the prevalence of chiasmus in literature and in writings that you have in the ancient world. Well, the Popol Vuh also has extensive passages of chiasmus.
One of the most profound examples of cultural and historical evidence in relation to the Book of Mormon are the writings of Don Fernando de Alvarez-Xochitl.
Born in 1578, Ixtlilxochitl was a descendant of both the last king of Texcoco and the next to the last emperor of Mexico. Educated in Spanish, he wrote a history of his people that predated the translation of the Book of Mormon by more than 200 years. His sources, he claimed, were the oral traditions of his people and many native writings and hieroglyphics that have since been lost.
Of a truth, I have the ancient histories in my hand, and I know the language of the natives because I was raised with them, and I know all the old men and principles of the land.
Scholars have been surprised to find many Native American traditions that compare so closely to the Bible. A great flood.
And it is recorded in the Tolteca history that this period, or First World, as they called it, lasted for 1,716 years, after which time great lightning and storms from heaven destroyed mankind, and everything in the earth was covered by water. After the flood, a few people escaped the destruction inside a Toplepetlacale, which interpreted means an enclosed ark.
Also a tower much like the Tower of Babel.
They built Sacuale very high and strong, which means the very high tower. Their language became confounded, such that they did not understand one another, and they were scattered to all parts of the world.
He gives an account of the first settlers of Mexico, a story reminiscent of an event recorded in the Book of Mormon, the voyage of Jared and his family to the New World.
The Tutecas, consisting of 7 men and their wives, were able to understand one another, and they came to this land, having first crossed many lands and waters, living in caves, and passing through great tribulations.
And finally, the coming of a bearded white god.
There arrived in this land a man whom they called Quetzalcoatl. His countenance was white, and he wore a beard. His manner of dress consisted of a long, flowing robe. He was considered just, saintly, and good, teaching them by deeds and words the road to virtue. He gave them laws and sane doctrine. He said that in the year that would be called Seacatl, he would return, and then his doctrine would be accepted, and his children would be lords and heirs of the earth.